welcome to the group exhibit Hydrogen and Fuel Cells here at Hannover Fair 2013. I'm Alexa von Busse and I'd like to invite you as your moderator to sit down to have a drink on the house, a coffee or water or whatever you like. And as this is a public forum, you're also invited to ask questions whenever they're coming up to your mind. Just raise your hand. I'm coming down with a microphone. So the next topic we're talking about is strategies for rolling out a hydrogen refueling infrastructure. And I will discuss this with the CTO of ITM Power, Dr. Simon Bourne. Give him a hand, please. Hi, Dr. Bourne. Nice to meet you here. Or may I call you Simon?
That's fine. Sure.
That's good. Okay, so for everyone who doesn't know ITM Power, maybe you can give us a short overview of what you're doing and where you're located.
Sure. Okay. Well, we're based in Sheffield in the UK, and we're fundamentally an electrolyzer company, and we build systems that generate hydrogen for clean fuel and also energy storage purposes.
What kind of electrolyzers do you use?
We use PEM electrolysis. And that's a significant part of our IP because the typical applications that we look to supply require a very specific response. And so PEM is very, very effective at being able to turn on and off very rapidly. Okay.
One of your goals is rolling out a hydrogen infrastructure. I remember us talking about the vision of doing this 2 years ago. I think we had the same discussion. What, in your opinion, has changed?
Okay, well, quite a lot has changed. I think we can see from the exhibit it's grown and there's a very significant emphasis on hydrogen and its production. What we've been doing over the last 2 years is doing a number of field trials and also establishing some important reference plant. We've been doing that on 3 tiers, really. The first is on a return to base methodology, where we've undertaken a number of field trials, and we are looking also at island communities, and we've established a good project there, and finally looking at things on a national level within the UK. So I'm quite happy to iterate on any of those. Okay,
can you give us some examples, or how did that take place?
Yeah, the trials that we started about 2 years ago now were called HOST, which stands for Hydrogen On-Site Trials. And what we did there was try to put hydrogen generation equipment and refueling equipment in the hands of potential customers. And so we built a transportable hydrogen refueler, and we supplied that along with 2 hydrogen-powered internal combustion engine vehicles to 21 different partners, which ranged from London Stansted Airport, DHL, UPS, people of that sort.
Okay, that's great. And how was this? How did they feel about? Or no, feel about is not the right word. I'm searching for a word. How did you reach them?
Okay, well, we got into contact with them because there's often great appetite for hydrogen, and lots of people comment that it's the future and it's going to happen and it'll be successful. But there's often a lot of key business and economic information that's missing to allow people to assess whether it works for them or not. So we have been in contact with many people that have got that interest and that appetite, and by doing the trials with them, they're able to gather the data that they need to understand how the system works. And the main outcomes for us were being able to show to people that the plant is effective and works and that it's safe, that we're able to go through all of the compliance that's necessary to use equipment like this in various locations, and also to establish a number of important trials and projects from the back of that. One important one was with Marks and Spencer's, which is a supermarket in the UK, where they were interested in using not delivery vehicles, but forklift vehicles, so materials handling equipment in a warehouse that contained food. And so they needed a set of vehicles that didn't generate any emissions. So their choices were batteries or hydrogen.
So like the food is not polluted?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, you got a lot of experience and data out of this, I guess. What problems could you solve there, and what problems are still there?
Well, the field trials are an important way for us to gather information about our own system, and we observe the different ways different people want to use the equipment, and you try to think of everything that you can in the design process and the early testing stages, but there are always things that people do with your equipment that you don't anticipate. So we were able to do a few things that made the user interface a lot easier. We were able to address some of the system, which meant that the routine maintenance you'd need to do was easier to access. But one of the most important things was to be able to access all of the data that's generated, all of the operating conditions, and be able to see that live through a SCADA link back at our base. So we can monitor these refueling stations quite closely without having to visit them.
Okay, yeah. So we're getting closer to the topic now. What are the current steps you're taking to roll out an actual hydrogen structure?
Okay, well, one of the systems that we're interested in is island communities, and they make for some very interesting early adoption opportunities.
Do you consider Great Britain as an island community?
There's one island in particular I was thinking of, which is called the Isle of Wight, which is just off the south coast of England.
Which is a little bit smaller.
Yeah, the people on the Isle of Wight called the UK the North Island, apparently. But we're interested in the Isle of Wight because they've got a very progressive approach to sustainability, and what they're in the process of doing is establishing a smart grid on the island which will assimilate a variety of different renewable sources of power and generate hydrogen for refueling vehicles on the island, and also for providing some electricity grid balancing services as well. And so we're putting down 2 refuelers on the Isle of Wight that will, one will make just over 100 kilograms of hydrogen a day, and that will be refueling a fleet of 20 vehicles that will be a mixture of fuel cells and internal combustion engines for use on that island.
Okay, so you're addressing vehicle producers at the moment to enlarge this?
Yeah, well, on that project on Eco Island, we're partnered with Hyundai, who are providing some vehicles, and we're also partnering Toyota. And in the wider structure, there is Toshiba, who are doing a lot of the smart grid controls. IBM are doing the interfacing and the billing. Cable and Wireless are doing all of the data transmission, so that all of the information in the vehicles and the smart grid can all communicate with one another. And it's very important to establish those good relationships so that you're ensuring everything, first of all, is compatible, but you do need the vehicles to emerge at the same rate as the hydrogen infrastructure, and there's a careful balance to achieve there.
Yeah, and what is important too, I guess, and as we host the EU Day today, I think it's important to point that out. Another speaker before, Monsieur Froid from Belgium, pointed out that we can't think in island solution. We are no islands. We are not just Great Britain, just Germany, just Spain. We all have to work together. What are you doing or contributing to this point?
Okay, well, I think that is a good point, and there are a number of initiatives which are seeking to link up existing infrastructure and make sure that any new infrastructure that's put down is sympathetic to the distribution of what exists at the moment. And there is a scheme which is focused on the UK, which is the UK Hydrogen Mobility Programme, which copies very closely the programme that took place in Germany, and there have actually been several positive steps to make sure that those national mobility schemes are connected together in a sensible way.
So it's comparable, our 2 mobility programs, in which ways?
Yeah, well, the thrust of the scheme in the UK has been to establish what the demand for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles is, and then look at what hydrogen refueling infrastructure would need to be rolled out to supply those vehicles, and then understand what the composition of how should you go about generating the hydrogen. There are a variety of different ways of doing that, and last of all, what the economic benefits are to the UK. But in that scheme, there was a good level of interaction with the German mobility programme. So a lot of the members are the same, and much of the information that was developed in the German programme was made available to the British programme, and that, I think, is a very positive step, and I'd hope that the UK would be able to share its learnings to other countries as they develop their programmes as well.
As ITM Power, did you address directly the German government, for example?
Yeah, well, ITM is one of the founding members of the UK Hydrogen Mobility Programme. The consortium as a whole includes 3 UK government departments and is run by a consultancy team, and that consultancy team was the same one that operated in Germany. So there was already a lot of connections there. So there was some political discussions that took place, but it was a fruitful outcome.
Okay. I remind the public that you have the opportunity to ask questions whenever they are coming up to your mind. Just raise your hand and I come down with a microphone. Are there any questions at the moment? Not right now. So you already mentioned that, who you are working with, but can you give us some more examples out of the real world and what is currently is existing and what you are currently doing there?
Yeah. We have established some refueling equipment in the UK. We've got a transportable refueler which we've actually brought here, and it's generating hydrogen for the ride and drive this week.
As on the demonstration ground,
That's right. It's outside, kind of at the corner of the building. Yeah.
Yeah. You're doing refueling demonstrations there. I think every 2 hours.
Yes, 10, 12, 2, and 4 every day.
Okay.
So if people want to come along, our stand is just behind. But if people want to come out and see the refueler, that's possible.
Okay.
We've formed some very good relationships in doing events like this and bringing our refueler along.
Who are you doing this with?
We're refueling the Honda Clarity and the bus that's come down from Cologne. And you ask about existing infrastructure. I'm often asked the question about pure electric vehicles and how they compare and what the infrastructure might have to be for battery vehicles versus hydrogen vehicles. And there's a couple of points that I think are interesting to make when it comes to what sort of strategy you need to come up with for rolling out the infrastructure. Yeah. And hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will typically travel around 400 miles, so they've got good range. Whereas the battery vehicles are much shorter, around 80 miles. And that means that there's a factor of 5 there on the range. But if you consider the area you need to cover when you're looking at a geographic location and how many refueling nodes, it's squared. So there's actually 25 times less hydrogen refueling requirement to be able to serve the same sort of distribution. And one of the things that came out very strongly from the mobility programs was that there was very strong appetite from consumers for the fuel cell vehicles, but something that was very sensitive to that interest was the availability of refueling stations, and the appetite to have a hydrogen vehicle jumped significantly when the scenario shifted from having 1 local refueling station to 2 local refueling stations. So there's a lot to think about in terms of how best to capture population areas. But the other thing that's worth keeping in mind as well is that when generating hydrogen by electrolysis, you can provide hydrogen that's green, that's got zero emissions because you can use renewable power in its generation. But it also enables you to offer a number of services to the electricity grid. And moving back to batteries for a minute, if we all had battery vehicles that we plugged in at home, they plugged on the low voltage network, and that would need serious strengthening if it were to be able to deal with the power requirement to do that. Yeah. Electrolysis enables you to put the hydrogen generation equipment in locations that both capture a good portion of the population, but also sit in areas of the electricity grid that may have some constraints or some issues, and the electrolysis can be used as a demand-side managed load to actually help balance the electricity grid as well. So there's quite a lot of considerations to try and stack on top of one another when working out where these stations ought to sit.
Yeah, you're certainly right there. And I can say from my point of view, my hunger for a hydrogen vehicle is high too, but when I cannot fuel my car, like in Poland or Switzerland or wherever I want to go for holidays, then it doesn't make sense to me. So do you see yourself struggling for installing or for in the project of rolling out a hydrogen structure without any help?
Yeah, there's certainly challenges in doing that, because something that makes, I guess, the profitability of a refueling station is strongly linked to how well it's utilized. And in the early days, when there's not a very high penetration of vehicles, the refueling stations aren't used as much, and so you don't make as much hydrogen, you don't sell as much hydrogen as that capital expenditure is capable of generating. So there is a little bit of a gap, and part of what the mobility programs have tried to do is quantify that gap and identify different mechanisms for trying to support it and make sure that the whole infrastructure can get to a point where it's self-sufficient in as short a space of time as possible. But it's worth mentioning that there is good support from governments in funding opportunities. The JTI is a good example as well, where they're trying to encourage different partners with different areas of expertise to come together to help solve all of these problems. And that does provide a certain amount of seed funding to help establish those important relationships.
A question from the public. I come down to you.
Thanks. As we all know, it's not necessarily the best technology that wins in the marketplace, but you're talking very sympathetically about a hydrogen rollout in the UK. Can you see a scenario economically and technically viable where you're going to have battery electric vehicle infrastructure, hydrogen infrastructure, natural gas vehicle infrastructure? Because there's so many pressure groups out there promoting each one, and they ain't talking to each other.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it is important. I think it's a good thing that there are a bunch of different competing technologies, because they provide a different solutions for different scenarios. I think it's important that the different technologies are demonstrated effectively, and that what they can do and what they can't do is spoken about openly, so that people can make those decisions. We have seen situations where certain technologies have had a good deal of backing, and then it's kind of ebbed away in favour of another technology. And I think that's a point for there being a sustained approach to support this issue of low emission mobility as time moves on.
Any other questions from the public? Do you think we have a presentation problem there, or a communication problem?
It's a difficult one to answer. I think events like this, discussions like this, field trials of all of the different technologies, in part are trying to get across to people just what is out there and what's possible. And people are always going to have a certain amount of bias in favour of their own technology, or so on and so forth. But I think ultimately, if you develop plan and put it in the hands of users and get that real candid feedback, there's no hiding from that. If certain things you can achieve, certain things you can't, that has to be borne out through practical and real life testing.
Okay, I think we're coming to the end. I'd like to point out that maybe our EU Day may help with this to roll out a hydrogen infrastructure. Today, several representatives of the Fuel Cells and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking Partnership Program are here, and that's what we are continuing with. My colleague Uli is already standing there and is going to talk to Dr. Jean-Luc Duplanque, the head of the program unit, about smart grid. So stay seated, have another coffee, feel free. Thank you very, very much, Simon, to be here.
Thank you.
For further questions, you can follow Simon to his